Welcome to Web Story Wednesday. And for those of you who saw the tweet earlier where the cover was blanked out because it said the name, well, today we are covering The Villainess Turns The Hourglass. So for those of you who don't know, I am Pajia. I am a webtoon obsessed reader and VTuber, part-time content creator with the flesh. But anyways, I hope you guys are really excited because I definitely am to talk about one of my favorite titles. This is my attempt at basically recommending stories unscriptedly because my recent videos have all been scripted and I'm really bad at memorizing, so it just looks awkward when it's my face. And I'm lazy at keeping up appearances, so I don't want to worry about it. This is supposed to be a very interactive live stream version of my recommendations, and I hope you guys enjoy. So anyways, back to the topic at hand. Being the first one of the session, I had to take it to one of the classics of the genre that I really am obsessed with and love, villainesses. And I just knew I had to do one that was not only complete, but also one that ended on a pretty good strong note and has an amazing epilogue, which I'll get to later. Let's get started, shall we? So first off, villainess stories. It's not a big surprise, villainess stories have become a very popular genre. I would even say that they are rivaling the rapid growth that we see in the more kind of like younger, like male fantasy, shonen genre, adjacent type of tower climbing stories. Now, the only thing is that this is about villainesses instead. And I think that there is a crazy outburst of these titles. As you can see, these are just four of what I think are semi-popular or very fun villainess stories. Two of them that I have a very personal fondness of, and two that I am, a little bit on the fence of. I really like, but haven't been able to finish reading or kept completely caught up for various reasons. It is basically the story of the main character being reincarnated or being the villainess of this classical historical fantasy type of setup. So basically what happens is that in this, our main character is a villainess with a variety of different reasons for why they are trying to change their fate. Usually that is the general premise where the villainess is fighting against fate, whether it be through time traveling, regression, isekai, romance, just living that romance and drama, misunderstanding, slice of life. There's a lot of different sub-genres of the villainess genre as a whole, and it really shows because we have so many different types of personalities in each of these villainesses. And with it comes a very different type of story being told. We get the serious stories, we get the dramatic ones, the ones with political intrigue, lies, love, and all that good stuff. Then we have the comedies, which has a little bit of everything as well, but mostly focuses on just kind of sitting back and enjoying the sort of, the world being presented for you and the story being told, which could be super serious at times, but overall, we'll just focus on being this relaxing and enjoyable experience. Now, this really introduces a lot of different personalities, and because of the, whole premise of the villainess story, sometimes it gets a little bit stale following within, but it's because villainess stories are a newly emerging sort of primary genre or trope that I believe has so much fun to be told just because it inherently twists one trope of a villainess character into the main character, which makes it a lot more fun and dynamic than I think other stories with more general premises have to work with, where they can just kind of do anything and it's kind of like, okay, well, it's not that special, not that crazy. This is already flipping the script on the villainess concept, which I absolutely love. So the only issue is that because of the fact that it is flipping this kind of genre on itself, it kind of leads to a severe problem. And that problem would actually have to be the fact that if evil, why hot? One of the favorite things that I've seen anybody who loves reading manhwa and romance stories and these historical kind of things usually ends up saying, or in general for any story with a hot evil person, if evil, why hot? And I think that really drives the fan base of villainess enjoyers and lovers. Because look at that. Like, listen, I'm not trying to tell you hear me out, but I actually am trying to tell you hear me out. You want to be reading stories where sometimes your main characters even that are following the stories of these villainess character is actually kind of evil, is actually a little bit morally ambiguous. Where are they? Not in a lot of stories, surprisingly. And as you can see, very much my reaction is exemplified by our little MC here from Until the Tragic Male Lead Walks Again. Not necessarily a villainess, but we'll get to that title story another time. Definitely one of my favorite stories, very enjoyable, and I hope that other people will maybe check it out even now. Back to the topic at hand. This has become a severe issue where there's a lot of villainess stories where our main characters aren't actually villainesses. And this mostly applies in the fact that a lot of these stories flip the villainess to be this kind of possessed or becomes this better or good person. And what that has led to is a very disproportional amount where we actually follow a villainess as a villainess for their life, for the way they act out, the characters being shaped. So that's why there is kind of this growing urge for, hey, where are the villainess stories that are actually about villainesses? This is a story I would highly recommend if you're asking yourself, villainesses are all just nice MCs and good people that are dumb and keep changing the plot. Mad. Well, if you're looking for something a little bit different, if you're looking for something that actually does follow that kind of inline, morally ambiguous main character who is the villainess, I introduce to you The Villainess Turns the Hourglass. The Villainess Turns the Hourglass is one of my favorite stories for a variety of reasons, and I'm gonna introduce to you basically a few general premises about what it is. So basically, the story follows Arya Rosente, who is a adopted, I guess, stepchild of Duke Rosente, or Count Rosente, but basically, he's some noble. I'm so bad with names in classes. It's one of the weakest parts of my recollection of these stories. But basically, she is originally a small girl from the streets who is the daughter of a prostitute. And basically what happens is when her mother is able to marry into this noble household, she is also elevated in status from being kind of this street rat, commoner born, like kind of lowly being that's very messy and dumb and doesn't value education and high class things, kind of finds herself into this magic situation where in the case that she was living under this household, she was actually set up for execution while she was living with them and living out her life in high society. And basically this is because she was set up as an ignorant villainess, but not just because of her general factors and personality, but also because of the fact that she was sort of pushed into that pigeonhole by her sister, who was the daughter of the Duke, the Count. God, this is gonna be a rough time describing this. But basically, she's pigeonholed by the daughter and the other daughter that was already there, and her maid. And basically what happens is that she's eventually executed for crimes against the kingdom and stuff like that. And so at the very last minute when she's about to be executed in public, basically her sister comes up and is like, wait, no, let me say something to my poor sister. And then she basically goes like, you little rats, coming in from the streets like a rat, and all that's good stuff. And basically what ends up happening from there is that she reveals that she had arranged everything to go wrong and for Arya to be executed. And the sister's name is Miel. Miel is a terrible noble who is classic textbook discrimination against anyone who's not noble. Very much of like that, they're not one of us if they like are a merchant family or join them. But basically, from there, she actually regresses with a new mission after finding herself like 10 years into the past. And that is that she is out for revenge and to protect her loved ones, which is basically just her mom. And she's out for revenge against Miel, the maids, all her enemies, and everyone who did her dirty in this life. So basically, yeah. And then after that, she also happens to find a magic hourglass. And that magic hourglass is the hourglass from the title and is actually brought to us because of its magic properties, which is that it sets time back by a few minutes. And so with this mystery in mind, as well as the mission to take revenge against Miel and also protect her mother, Arya starts her second life anew. And that is why she is the time-twisting, two-lived lady. Though I kind of wish I put villainess in there, but it's kind of hard to do that. And then it's just like, but the title's already Villainess Turns the Hourglass. You're just saying the same thing. I'm like, yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right. God, I hate being so illiterate. Anyways, next up is going to be things the story does right. So just to talk about it, I'm going to be doing a little bit of a pros and cons list of what makes this story so good, and then what makes it kind of not great, and then just to set expectations, and then what I personally like about it. So the first off is going to be things the story I think does wonderfully. First off, strong female lead. I actually believe that Arya is probably the most, I guess, assertive female lead that I've seen in a hot minute. or I mean, not in a hot minute, but like at the time, she was very rare for the genre at the time. And it was actually really wonderful reading the story about how this villainess is actually someone who's out for personal intentions and isn't just a good person. Because a lot of them are just like, oh no, I'll forgive you. And then there's no real conflict. And then it just becomes like a slice of life. And sure, that's great. It's a really satisfying read to like just kind of sit back and be like, I enjoy this. Because I have reads like that too. But when you're looking for a dramatic story where revenge is the main theme, you really do want a story where your female lead, main character, is just gonna make you go like, oh wait, she's a little bit evil. She's a little bit morally ambiguous. And because then you see that there's like a lot of very practical, more serious and realistic options being presented in the story, making it a lot more enjoyable to follow along. So yeah, and she's just not, like I said, a goody two-shoes. She's just not that great. And sure, she's not like an evil character where she's just purely just destroying everything and ruining people's lives for fun. She's doing it out of personal intent, and I think that it's very morally ambiguous because she is also doing a lot of things good. She's proposing like ways to make life better. She's making things seem great. She's just also scheming and manipulating everything from the back, which also makes it a very interesting story to follow along because the events of the story in itself are very satisfying to follow because Arya is in this constant kind of war against Miel and all the opposition and enemies from her last life. She's doing her best in order to live a new life that would be, appreciated and really make her own family and her own personal like attachments be better. And I think that it's very satisfying because she is scheming and doing what makes sense for her position and what's at her disposal in order to deal with the issue being Miel. And so yeah, it's a very satisfying story to follow. I think the events are great. The pacing never feels too whack or like too slow or boring. And I think it's very enjoyable, especially since the story is completed. So you can kind of just go through all of it and the pacing feels pretty fine. It doesn't feel incredibly fast. Even when I was reading it chapter by chapter, it didn't really feel crazy too. In addition to that, as you can see from the panels that I've selected. So the art is definitely one of the things that I appreciate a lot and I think is a great thing to enjoy, especially if you have an eye for that or if you're very much like, I need like good art in order to be able to read something. I would definitely say that The Villainess Lives Twice has very expressive and sort of this unique style that is not so far apart from the generic manhwa style, but isn't completely like falling in line with it where it's like, this is just the same like art style and it looks visually boring. There's a lot of scenes, the art just emphasizes these scenes so well and I love it. And then to top it all off, I think that because of this, in addition to the story being very satisfying to follow, it does, saying this from someone who has read the whole story and doesn't want to spoil it too much, the story does definitely fits everything kind of very neatly in a sense, where I think that everything kind of falls in line. It's like when playing Tetris and we just did a full clear, like all the blocks are gone and we are starting from a completely clean slate and it's wonderful. But that kind of leads into something I'll say later, which is gonna tie me into the next part, which is things that I think should be addressed to set expectations. While it is a romance story, being completely honest, straight up, and there is love in the concept that it is something that is an element of the story as well, due to Arya's manipulative nature. It is there. It's there, and I would say it's not bad, but I think this reaction should very well much say the actual state of this, and it's that it's not that great. The romance, for sure, 100% is not the best thing I've ever read. It's really cute, but it's just really simple and it's really straightforward where, the main love interest is not that, deep of a character. And while he does play a very big role, I don't think it's mostly because of the romance between him and Arya. And I think it starts off okay because it builds up like this interest. It builds up the sort of like kind of not just like jump into it like, oh, I'm in love with you. It very much does kind of establish itself. But the thing is that I will say that it can be a bit lacking. And if you don't find it lacking, perfect. That means this works out for you. But I will say that if you're looking for something really, really intense and really riles up your emotions, I can't say that it really did any of that. I think it was just an element of the story, and while I did think it was cute at times, it didn't really, blow me away. Though I will say, the epilogue is relevant to this, and again, I'll talk about that later. I will also say that another issue is that answers and developments can sometimes be a bit repetitive or boring. I think the events make the story very satisfying, don't get me wrong. I do think that the story as a whole is very entertaining, and I love to read along with it. But the only issue is that it sometimes does feel a bit like the same answers are being presented, the same sort of mistakes are being made. And that will weaken the story a little bit. And that also goes into kind of this next point as well, and that it's a very simple plot. The plot is very simple, it's very straightforward. And I can't say that this is the most dramatic or intense or, not the most engaging type of story. But I do think that it is very nice to read and satisfying regardless. It's just not going to be as intense as some other stories with their plot, like Your Throne, for example, which is very deep into the political intrigue and drama, into the mystery and everything. And yeah, it's mostly just kind of like a very bare bones story about, hey, we have a problem, we're gonna solve it. And that problem is meow. I'm sorry, I just couldn't help myself. But yeah, everything, I will say though that in addition to everything fitting neatly from my last point, which is like, kind of like, everything's tidy and like has like a little bow wrapped onto it. Everything's a little bit too neat and sometimes just doesn't feel like that great. I will say that there are some people who are like, there's something about the story that kind of makes it that a lot of the themes of the story didn't really fly, but at the same time, I don't necessarily agree. But I do understand their point, and this is to ground at people's expectations that, sometimes things are just like gonna wrap up neatly, and this is one of those stories that just does that. So I hope that you brace yourself for that if you decide to read it. But regardless, it is definitely a story that I think that isn't perfect, isn't amazing in the greatest way, but is a nice story about a villainess who's actually a villainess. And so we're gonna move into this next one, and that is the things I personally enjoy. And this will line up a little bit with what I like about the story, but what can I say? I'm just not that great of a critic. But I do like to share recommendations based on, what's happening. So first off, let's talk about Arya's development. Arya's development is very interesting because she starts off as the sort of haughty, nonchalant, like, I'm gonna use all this money because I can, education and socializing. Socializing is all I need, education means nothing. I have all the money in the world. And basically, Arya starts off as this character in her first life. And we are already introduced to this pretty quickly. But in her second life is already when Arya starts to develop very quickly. And this happens because of the fact that Arya is going to, is trying her best to get revenge, right? Arya's development starts as she realizes the tool she needs is good connections and intelligence to be able to carry out her own plans. And so she becomes a very competent character who is very aware of all the schemes and whatnot that Miel tries to pull on her. And I think that the beauty of that is that Arya is sort of still affected by her first life in ways that even we don't realize because of the way that she acts. And I think that I will be completely straight up. Arya doesn't perceive herself as a good person. She perceives herself as someone who will do whatever it takes. She finds herself lethal, brutal, serious and practical. And she is. But the thing is, she also overlooks the objective moral value of the things that she contributes, even in her second life, where she's coming back from being like this villainess. And I find that wonderful because basically it's just this sort of situation where she is growing and you thinking that like all these connections are just for her personal gain and that there is no love or affection or genuine, happiness there. But as the story progresses, so does Arya. And we find ourselves in a situation where Arya is still learning to cope with sort of the conditions that she still is affected by in her first life. So it's a very strong point of the story, and I think one of my favorite reasons why Arya is a character that will always kind of stay close to my heart in terms of, especially the early set of manhwa that I found that are in the villainess genre. And one that I would totally recommend, though other people might not see it as much. Again, these are just my opinions, so Don't mind if you don't necessarily agree if you've already read it or if you do a read through and don't find yourself to be, you know, aligned with that view. Another one is Revenge Catharsis. I'm gonna keep it cut and dry. Arya is a villainess through and through, in terms of the fact that she will get what she wants and she will do what it needs to be done to get it. And as a result of that, that means that she's not gonna give up until her revenge is completed. Now, there's a very long direction, and I think it's inevitable with stories like this, where it's just expected that the main character is gonna get the revenge. And I will always be a proponent for the fact that it's important that even though we know where it's going, that we can step back and just watch how the story unfolds, because that's what the story is mostly about, at least when it comes to me. So that's why even if I read something, I'll always reread it, even though I know how it's gonna happen. And I think that Villainess Turns the Hourglass is a wonderful story where it's very satisfying kind of seeing Arya get her revenge in these small ways and just keep on going, you know? Her revenge is focused on terrorizing Miel and taking the spotlight in order to live a better life and protect those she cares about. And I think that the story does this wonderfully because we are able to see this cathartic scene where Arya is just able to pull one over on Miel and just be able to win out. And it's just this wonderful story of that happening. It's amazing to watch and witness, and I think it's very enjoyable. And for those who like the revenge genres, it's not extreme, but it is there, and I would say that this is also a fitting tone for people who like a little bit of cruel and ambitious revenge. Another thing I personally adored about this story is, again, the epilogue. This is my third time mentioning it, but the epilogue is a fantastic story. The epilogue is actually one of my favorite pieces of writing and little epilogue side stories that I've consumed in recent times. Would highly recommend. It's very cute, very adorable. Doesn't really have to do with the plot too much, but I think that it just kind of is a very satisfying conclusion or forward kind of motion for the trajectory of these characters and what happens after the events of the main story. So would highly recommend reading all the way to the epilogue as well if you can. And yeah, which also ties me into the last one. The fact it's all done. That's right, everything about it completely bingeable. So you can just kind of pull it up and you'll just be like, oh yeah, I'm not going to bed until it's 5 a.m. in the morning. Please don't do that. It's just not good for you. I know I've been doing it way too much lately. But basically, yeah, the fact it's all done. The Villainess Turns the Hourglass is a rarity, in my opinion, for a lot of titles that I've covered, read, and in general consumed, especially because villainess genre is still kind of developing. The historical fantasies are still kind of growing a little bit, and the good ones are taking a while to finish up. And I would have to say that having one that's all done and started and finished the way it did, I think it's a great thing to treasure and have. And I think that if you love binging, this is a great story to read. And especially for those of you who are just sticking around to watch what I yap about, regarding Villainess Turns the Hourglass, I would say that it's worth the reread. I think I did a reread not too long ago, within the last year or so, and I very much did enjoy it again because it's nice seeing it all play out. And again, it's not a complicated story, and that's the benefit. You're not invested mostly because of the political intrigue or drama or mystery or anything like that, or how things are gonna go, or the tension. You're doing it because of the way the story goes, and it's fun to follow. And I think that's wonderful. So that's why I would highly recommend it, and yeah. And in the wise words of someone cool, I would say, you should read this now. Someone cool named Paji, that's me. Oh my god, look at that. Thank you.